I'm a big believer in failure as a way to learn. I believe most people are not smart enough to learn from their successes. Maybe it's possible, but it's very hard. And maybe it's not even learning. Maybe it's not a learning, but they prepare you to recognize your opening, your chances.
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to a friend of mine. You see, there are successful founders, and then there's having $1.5 billion in annual recurring revenue. This is one of those stories. Today, we're talking to Daniel Dines, the founder and CEO of UiPath, a company whose rapid ascent to that kind of revenue was an overnight success just a decade in the making. For someone with entrepreneurial ambition, I think Daniel's story is one you need to hear. This conversation is about far more than just UiPath's success, however. It's about the realities of building a company from the ground up, the painful but necessary pivots, and the clarity that comes only from taking a big swing and failing. Daniel talks candidly about growing up in communist Romania, where cynicism was the default mindset, and how moving to the US forced him to confront the idea that people could genuinely believe in something greater than themselves. That shift in thinking, sadly all too rare these days, was the foundation for his journey. We also dive into one of the biggest misconceptions in startup culture, the belief that founders need to be bombastic visionaries from day one. Daniel argues the opposite. He began modestly, not without ambition, but without the pomp and circumstance. He was relentlessly focused on solving real problems for real customers. In fact, for the product that eventually became the foundation of UiPath's success, he didn't really appreciate in the early days just how big it was going to be. Now, I know it's very common in the startup world to pretend that never happens, that founders always know how big it is from the beginning. But if you're around these stories and can hear the honest account of what it was really like, you'll find this is more common than you think. Finally, Daniel offers a rare behind-the-scenes look at the toll of hypergrowth, what it's like to go from struggling for survival to being at the center of one of the most successful IPOs in recent years. He reflects on the mistakes made along the way, the cultural shifts that happen when a company gets too big too fast, and why he decided to return as CEO to lead UiPath into its next chapter. If you're a founder navigating uncertainty, struggling with your own pivots, or wondering what it really takes to scale a company to these heights, this is a conversation you're not going to want to miss. Let's dive in to my conversation with Daniel Dines. Daniel, thank you for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
It's nice to catch up. It's always good to see you. I thought maybe we would just start. The UiPath story is so wild to me, and it kind of begins in communist Romania, as all Silicon Valley startup stories do. So and there's a lot of people listening to this that don't really even remember the Cold War or haven't had the experience, don't really know what it was like. So just paint us a little bit of a picture of what was it like growing up in that environment?
Well, it was very remote from how, I see kids, I see my son growing up here in New York. So I was playing all day long. Soccer was really a big thing. I didn't think much of communism. But Romania is still a country in the Balkans, so I think we have a great sense of humor. So what I remember about communism were all the jokes, really, and the memes about communism and our dictator. So actually, it's an interesting lesson of how not to do things in life. Because everything was a joke, basically. Nobody believed in it. I thought it would have been much more interesting to live in like Soviet Union in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. Because I think people had a sense of mission, belief. In Romania of the 80s was really complete ridicule. So everything was making fun of it. Nobody believed it. But anyway, I think the biggest lesson is people didn't believe in anything. It was no kind of meritocracy. We all knew in order to make a really good living, you have to be a member of the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. And they kind of killed the truth. I remember in my meetings with teachers. So we had what we call like information about politics or something. And they were lying to us. We know that they were lying. They know that we know that they were lying, and they were still lying. And that was kind of widespread in the society. And everybody participated into this big lie. Just kind of weird. But it kind of influences your mind. It's, in all fairness, I think when I come first time to US, I was really surprised to see people really genuinely believe in something. Up to that, I was 28 years old when I come to US. Up to that age, I always thought that nobody really believes. And to me was saying something like, I want to make a mark in the world. To me was always a sign of being a bit ridiculed and not understanding, the world and not be grounded enough. Now, so I was raised with an enormous bullshit radar. I still have it, honestly.
I know. Oh, I know.
But I've somehow trained myself to believe. To me, it was a big transformation. Even in the beginning of UiPath, I was really very shy on telling guys, we are doing major work. We are changing the labor market. We are changing how people deliver. We are making their life much more enjoyable. It's huge what we are doing. But I was shy. I couldn't say this because of the fear of, of people thinking this is a bullshit. And it's stupid and this guy got crazy. But then I started to believe in it. It's to me, our technology came first, and then the belief that it's so important came at a later time.
This episode is brought to you by my friends at Wilson Sonsini, the innovation economy's law firm. From the earliest days of the semiconductor industry to today's fast advancing AI sector, not to mention healthcare and life sciences, Wilson Sonsini has represented the pioneers behind nearly every technology breakthrough. Based in Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini is connected to the top minds and institutions that inspire discovery and innovation, with strong ties to leading venture capital firms and investors in key markets, from Silicon Valley to New York and London and beyond. In fact, Wilson Sonsini is consistently top ranked for the number of venture financings it handles each year. For more information, visit ecbc.wsgr.com. This episode is brought to you by Explo, which makes customer-facing analytics and data reporting that can be embedded directly in your application. If you've ever gotten customer support requests for dashboards, reports, raw data, you don't have to build it yourself anymore. Enter Explo, a fully white-label embedded analytics solution designed entirely with your customer in mind. Getting started is easy. Explo connects to any relational database or warehouse. All the styling and dashboards are done with low code. And once you're ready, just embed the final product directly into your application with a tiny code snippet. The best part? Explo's AI allows your customers to make their own reports and dashboards themselves instead of burdening customer support. Build and embed a fully white-labeled analytics experience in days. Try it free at explo.co/Eric. That's explo.co/ERIC.
Given how we tell the stories of entrepreneurship, it's funny to me how often that's the truth. That even people who have the insight and are on the brink of a discovery or a breakthrough themselves don't believe in what they're doing. And I think a very common wrong piece of advice people give out is that entrepreneurs need confidence. So people often encourage them to think big and to, be bombastic. And I laugh when I coach entrepreneurs because I've had VCs tell me that I don't sound confident enough when I'm pitching my video. Is that hilarious?
I totally agree with you. And I am telling actually even today to my fellow young entrepreneurs, guys, exactly, you don't have to be bombastic. Don't come with this, I'm going to change the world. Create a good piece of technology, find some good customers, solve something, and then it's going to increase. The vision will become bigger. You don't have to start with the huge vision.
Totally. Visions are discovered. It's like a scientific discovery.
Exactly.
More than like a bolt out of the blue that you have in a dream, although I guess that does happen sometimes. Yeah. I really want to pick up on this point you're making about cynicism and the truth, because I hadn't thought of it before, but we've had this conversation before and talked about UiPath. It's such a mission-driven company, and you've been at this for a really long time. But I was thinking about the broader social implications, like how sad when a society falls into cynicism and a disrespect for the truth. And I've always felt like one of the first tenets of entrepreneurship is earnestness and a commitment to the truth. At the end of the day, entrepreneurship just doesn't work. You can BS your way to a certain degree. You can raise a certain amount of money. You can fool some of the people some of the time. But at the end of the day, the underlying thing has to work. It has to do something for other human beings. Otherwise, it's all pointless. And so I just wonder if you want to talk about that. Like, that seems like such a formative experience. And I know there's people who worry that, Western societies have kind of turned their back on science, turned their back on truth telling, and of course, very, very widespread cynicism about technology, about the future, about climate. You pick it. It's going on. I wonder if you have a unique perspective on that, having been raised in that environment and kind of had a chance to do something really different.
I'm thinking a lot of my mistakes in finding the truth, because in a way I have my personal gnosis about the role of the universe. And I think the role of the universe is to create knowledge. So finding truth. And it's a constant endeavor. It's infinite, in my opinion. But I was thinking, what stops me in doing the right thing, basically all the time? And it's my sense of comfort. And sometimes it's my lack of desire for confrontation. So I traced my biggest mistakes, as I did in my life, in my personal life, in my professional life, as the CEO of UiPath, to knowing in my gut things are not going well, but not avoiding the confrontation, avoiding clearly saying my opinion, go for it, changing, fixing. So I guess this is kind of common for many people.
Oh, yeah.
I feel very few people are really bullies that can go, and you can recognize them easily and people learn to work them around. But in a normal company, I think there is some level of comfort that is destructive. And
No, I think that's very profound. And the beautiful thing about the truth is every part of the truth is connected to every other part. It's just one holistic thing of the universe itself. So that means that if you pull on the thread of inquiry anywhere, any problem, any topic, even the smallest detail, you might unravel one of the world's biggest mysteries. Like, you never know. And of course, that's true of scientific discovery. It's true of so many artistic endeavors, but it's also true of entrepreneurship. That when you started this journey to UiPath, we joke on this show all the time about these overnight successes that are 10 plus years in the making. But UiPath really, that you fit that model so well. Like, you began with such a simple and humble beginning. I can imagine that in retrospect, you can see the thread of how that inquiry led you to, one of the world's largest companies. But at the time, if someone had gone back in time to tell you that that's what would happen if you start pulling on the thread of this sweater, it must have seemed quite a remote possibility. And so I wonder, when you look back on it now, like from being in that cynical environment, from, being Romania, I know you came to the US, you worked at Microsoft for a time, you had some preparation, but it wasn't like, to me, it doesn't seem from the outside like a very linear path. Like, obviously this would lead to this incredible outcome. Like, what to you were the kind of the clues or the early signs that you were on the right path, or that you were onto something interesting?
Well, it feels really as unlikely as the appearance of life on Earth, honestly. But I can trace it. I can trace it back to some moments of joy. Eric, you are a writer. You understand very well the writer being in the flow, having this joy that is kind of supreme. You write a piece of thing, and it's ecstasy. It's pure ecstasy, right? Mm-hmm. And you feel you've done something well. So you have, maybe the book would be a huge success, maybe not. But if you don't have this joy, I think this ecstatic feeling, it's one of the signs. You are on the path to something meaningful. So I remember.
And do I remember right that you wanted to be a writer as a young person? Is that true? You wanted to write fiction, right?
Yes, that was my first dream. But look, I discovered very, very soon when I was like 17 that I had no talent for writing. I'm still, I think, a good reader. So I read fast and I read a lot. And that kind of helped me. Because when I was like 13, I was sick in bed with some kind of flu or something. And a friend of my mom brought me a book that changed maybe that was the first time when I've become actually an entrepreneur. It was a book of an American author. His name is Jack London, and the book is called Martin Eden. And it's the story of a guy of a very poor upbringing that was a sailor, and he became like a writer. It was, and he said, the author said, the writers are the titans of this world. So I thought it's so profound, so, it gave me this feeling. So I thought, I want to be a writer. And I think the ethos of doing something was instilled in that moment. And I remember the genesis of the first piece of code in UiPath. So I was working with the young developer, and among some things that we were building, we've built actually a small software library that would allow to capture all the text that you see on computer screens. And we use a pretty interesting technique, hooking the operating system. And the moment I tested first time and I saw that it works, I had this immense kind of joy and ecstatic feeling. And believe me, this library is still part of our code base. And it was the very first piece.
Hooking the Windows UI events?
Yes, exactly. Hooking the Windows API.
Yeah. I wrote a library like that once. You're giving me flashbacks.
Really? Yeah,
it's funny. If I had known what it could be used for, I was only using it to capture the state of the screen to get bug reports. So I knew what was going on when the user things crashed.
We might have done the same thing, actually. So we were hooking actually Windows GDI functions and
exactly.
And we were forcing a refresh of the screen, and then we got everything. This is the genesis of UiPath.
Those, if you know, you know. This. Now we're in the weeds of the Windows SDK.
But who could have thought at that time from this small piece of thing you built a company?
I love that. Definitely not something that would be obvious in retrospect. But I want to pick up on this because we live in a time when there's all this skepticism about entrepreneurship, about technology, about the intentions of the people that pursue this path. And a time when we kind of valorize celebrities, artists, actors, directors. And I think what's so interesting about your story is that if people didn't know what happened next, they would think you were telling the preamble to an artistic career. A career as a writer, a career, maybe you do that. I can't write, but I'll be a filmmaker. You're describing this like ecstatic experience, writing a piece of code. And I talk about that. Like, how did you make that leap to realize that you could pursue this kind of creative ambition in the context of business, in the context of technology, when that's such an unusual idea?
I worked as a software engineer for a few years, and I was not content with the job of writing code. Even though it's still, I think many engineers are really one of the most fortunate creatures because you get in that state of flow when write code. No, I still remember.
You get paid to do it. It's unbelievable to me. Yeah.
No, but even if you are, I remember moments of deep anxiety. And then at that time we didn't work from home. So I went back to Microsoft, to my office, like Friday evening, like after midnight, because I was feeling really bad. I went in front of the computer. After 30 minutes of coding, everything went away and I feel just peace. It's so powerful to have this deep focus, to to have a profession that requires deep focus. And so in a way, I think entrepreneurs, engineers, they have a creative angle. They share, the profound moment of creation. But for me, I don't know, coding was not my calling. I think I was a decent engineer, but I was not a top engineer. So I was fortunate to work in SQL Server, which is really one of the greatest pieces of software ever written. So I've seen how, these 10x engineers.
You were there in the NT5 days, right?
I was there, yes, between 2000 to 2005.
Oh, yeah. I was there just before you. That's funny. We almost overlapped.
Yeah? I didn't know you were.
I was an intern in the IIS Advanced Technologies Group in 1998, something like that.
Wow, awesome. But Microsoft, had really great engineers at the time.
Oh, at that time especially, yeah.
So I was looking at the kernel of SQL Server, seeing some pieces of code so, I don't know, Chris, so interesting. So it was like reading a great book. It was a great experience.
I'm so glad you say that, because that's how I felt about it. And I feel like that's an idea that people think, whenever I say stuff like that out loud, people look at me funny. But I really think as a profession, I wish we would reclaim that idea that this is a creative and artistic enterprise. And I bring it up because it's become so much about the money and this fame and the success and the power. And obviously we have these very famous peers basically having a mental breakdown in public right now. So it's, I think that path is not leading them to any kind of happiness, even though I think it's nominally supposed to be about, they think they're pursuing their happiness, but it seems like it's bringing them to a lot of stress. And I think part of the reason, I'm curious if you feel this way too, is like they've gotten away from the work itself as the source of beauty and contentment, and through that, the source of impact into the world, and have gotten caught up in the other trappings, the exhaust that comes out the back of these machines when they operate. And I've always appreciated
I feel very intimately what you describe here. My pure moment of peace and happiness were when I was coding, when I was immersed. This is why actually I've come with this. In UiPath, we have 4 values from the beginning of the company. It's to be humble, to be bold, to be fast, and the last one is to be immersed. I believe this is the state of mind when you can create valuable things. It's only being immersed. And you are, a lot of time we are disturbed by life and thoughts and everything else. And it's, look, so to me, I couldn't live in my coding cocoon, honestly. I had the passion to go outside. And I was speaking about books. Another book that is a favorite of mine is of a German author. His name is Hermann Hesse. And it's one of the book is called Narcissus and Goldmund. And it's the story actually of 2 friends that were raised in a monastery. And one of them goes in the world to see the world, while the other stays there and just, dedicates.
You're talking about the glass bead game, right?
No, it's another one.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say the Magister Ludi. Yeah, very similar.
No. Yeah, very similar. But it's interesting. One of them has the propensity to go outside, explore the world. So I had this. I didn't want to stay in my office in Microsoft, so I wanted to see the world. And look, the only idea that I had at that time was, let's go back to Romania, hire some good engineers, less expensive, with my own savings. It was completely bootstrapped from the beginning. And let's try to build something.
Why did you choose to go back to Romania? I always thought that was such an interesting part of your story, because you had, I think a lot of people would have said, well, you got out of that environment. You came to the United States, the land of opportunity and all that. And you're like, why go back versus try to start the company in the US?
Look, I think there are few reasons. I think many of us have a nostalgia about things in our past that we see, really, this is when I had my best life. About home. So for me, Romania was home. And my language, my friends, my environment was home. So it was nostalgic, but also was stupidity, honestly. So I didn't believe someone will trust me to invest, because if I were to build this in US, I had to raise capital. I have to go. Look, to me, it was such a remote game that I didn't think about. Around 2005, we were a bit unlucky to navigate all of this, post-internet boom crash.
Yeah.
So I was thinking completely as an engineer. I thought that it's enough to build a good product. Customers will jump on it, will use it. They know how to use it, how to train themselves, how to deploy, how to manage.
Of course.
Yeah, they should, right?
They should. Yeah, exactly. Why don't they read the manual?
Yeah, exactly.
They should write. They should be so grateful to receive our product. They should be willing to write the manual for us.
Yeah, they should do fair comparison with us, choose on the merits of products alone. Everything they should do. Yes.
Oh, that is a very interesting world to live in, but it's not the world we live in, sadly.
Not the slightest bit of it.
But you called it stupidity, but I think one of the things that's really interesting about that story, and it reminds me a bit, I was just doing the interview with Craig Newmark, who started Craigslist. And he had this people think of that as another overnight success, but there were years and years. He didn't even know if it was going to be a company or what it was going to turn into. And he had a very long time where he could just keep iterating and testing and trying different things. And he didn't need to raise money. He didn't need fancy designers. Because he didn't have any money and he didn't want the trappings of raising money, he didn't incur the expenses that would have required him to do all that stuff. So he bought himself kind of inadvertently this extended runway where he could really try things on his own. And the product was such that he could understand the entire product. And because of that, he had a kind of a grace that no investor would ever have afforded him to be able to really figure out what he wanted to do. And I think you maybe it was accidental, maybe it was by design, it doesn't really matter. But here's another example where you put yourself in a situation where your cost basis was low and you were in direct communication with potential customers and you had to kind of figure it out. And I wonder if you could talk about, of course, there's obviously the downsides of bootstrapping, the downsides of being far from the financial centers of the world, but talk about the advantages you found of being able to really do that in a low pressure, fast velocity kind of way.
So I think one of the clear advantage was that every dollar that I had, I was using just to hire engineers. I couldn't spend any dollar on technical support, salespeople, marketing, nothing. Nada. So I had to do it all of myself. In a way, I thought I am devaluing myself, doing all of this,
the grunt work,
side gigs. But look, I wanted to build something. But it forced me to learn so many great things. It forced me first to do online marketing, to do digital, to understand how to write a good ad on paid marketing, how to do
Yes,
SEO.
I remember learning that. Difficult.
It's so difficult, especially for an engineer. How can you have a product that has 100 features? How can you synthesize it in just 30 characters? It's difficult, but it's force your mind to be much more synthetic, to understand the storytelling, understand the message. And then I get my first legal education by writing the EULA of our products. And then it served me. Even when I talked with my first investors, I learned everything. I learned every legal term, It forces you to otherwise, if you have access to capital day one, you will hire a VP. Man, I think it's disgusting when I see startups with, under like $1 million in revenue hiring VP of marketing, VP everywhere. That's the recipe for failure, honestly.
Yeah, well, so I think so. You're telling this story like it's inevitable what happened, but I want to again point out, just for the founders who are thinking about this, I know a lot of engineers who would go into that exact situation that you're talking about and still wouldn't learn any of those lessons, because even though there's nobody else to do it for them, the other choice you had would be to neglect those topics and just say, "Well,
because they are in the trap. If I do the right product, market will come." I realize actually. Again, when you have to pay the salaries, and it's not, you realize very soon markets are not coming to you.
Yeah.
You have to go there, tell the story.
Yeah. So the other thing I think is interesting about this story is this is how a lot of companies' stories begin that become kind of professional outsourcers. Like a very common story is an immigrant builds engineering facility in a lower cost country and uses that to sell development services to people in higher cost countries. Like and there are many, many, many small businesses and even a few larger ones, but mostly small businesses that do this all over the world. Everyone in the business knows this business model very well. They don't usually turn into product companies. So talk about that transition. It wasn't even called UiPath, if I remember right. It was quite different. Yeah, help us understand how did you figure out that you needed to make this pivot into being a product company? And then how did you actually accomplish it?
Look, my intent was from day one to build products. For me, this outsourcing business was strictly a way of funding our product business. Mm-hmm. And for most of the time, we had a strict separation between people that were doing outsourcing stuff and people that were doing products. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want, and I think many companies doing outsourcing will try to build some products, but it's a side gig. It's not the most important thing.
Absolutely.
For me, that was the most important thing. I knew that, and that I was like a writer trying to write his own books while ghosting for others.
Uh-huh. Look, but why? Why was that important to you?
I don't know. No, this is how I am built. That was even I knew some of the things were not even successful in the market, but even today, that gives me, this is my passion to understand how to create things, to put things together and see how they evolve, see the better product, adding something, always on the top. That makes me, it's better than just being like a software architect. So that was my job in the outsourcing business, was more like software design, making sure the teams work well, doing some project management, but not much. And many projects were really underwhelming, in all fairness. So that was, I didn't get excitement. That was just a source of revenue. But from the other gigs, I got a lot of excitement. That was my reason of being.
Tell me the story about one of your false pivots before RPA. So before you pivoted into the business that UiPath became, you must have built other products that didn't take off. Were there any ones that you were convinced were going to be the thing and then turned out not to be?
Yeah, one of the products that we built was password management stuff. That was capable of like filling. It's a commodity now, but it was novel then. Sure. Yeah, it was pretty novel at that point because we were capable not only filling the password fields, but also doing some more actions. It was a very early version of UiPath, so in a way. You could have just record something. You are in a browser, you enter a password, you press enter, then we will ask you, do you want to record a simple script that will also launch the website and even more? So the initial idea was if you go to read an email, you maybe want to click on another link or something like that, something simple.
Yeah, sure. I can imagine that.
But I invested a lot of time and money, and it was a long thought battle on with some other products, but we never got really traction with this one. But
So I think the reason I'm asking you is that people misunderstand pivots, and I hear about it all the time because if anyone has an issue with the word pivot, I'm like the person they take it up with. May as well have my name right there in the dictionary. Please call for complaints, this person. So a very common issue people run into with pivots is they think the hard part of a pivot is picking the new direction. When in fact, in my experience, the hard part of a pivot is letting go.
It's letting go
of the old thing. And I want you to talk about when you had the customer come to you. If I remember right, there was like I've heard you tell the story. Was it a Japanese company or there was a company that came to you to do some preliminary version of RPA? It sounds like when you tell the story, it was like the clouds parted. The light shone down at this is your future, and you just piece of cake. But it must have been difficult, first of all, for you to let the old thing go. And then for your team as well, for you to say, look, guys, even though we've put all this energy into the password thing here,
no, but
we want to do this different. Just talk about what that was like.
At that time, no, we were exhausted. And honestly, when we saw the light, really, first time, we were exhausted on the verge of giving up. And actually, we did the pivot in around 2011. So the pivot was, let's give up completely on outsourcing business. One of our major customer kind of was on was almost bankrupt. So he said they cannot continue with us. So it's fine.
Yeah.
It was an opportunity. So I had to let go all the people that were doing the outsourcing, and we were trying to live only with what we were selling. And it was the first, we were selling these libraries for developers. And we decided, let's go B2B. Let's build this product that will ultimately become UiPath Studio, the one that allows you to offer an RPA workflow. And 2 years later, after we launched the product, and really, our market was very lukewarm. It didn't matter. We got the first. And at that time, it was almost 8 years since started the company. I was living for 8 years like with $2,000 a month, honestly. Everything else went into running the company. I was feeling I don't have a career. I'm rusty. I didn't see myself going back being an employee after all this year. So I thought I'm going to have a mental breakdown. And so when we were seeing, actually, there are some interesting customers that are now, and this RPA is, I learned about RPA in 2013. It was instant. Eric, sometimes you recognize the moment that you have waited for. At that time was really no turning back. We said, wow, this is the market we have waited for. Let's go big on it. It's a bit like what we are doing with agentic automation right now.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to that because I want to get your views on agents and the future of AI. But I think what's really interesting about that story, and I'm so glad you talk about it so honestly, because I know many entrepreneurs right now who are in the midst of this kind of crisis. And the thing I want to illustrate for those that have not been through this before is it sounds like, and I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, but some people will interpret your story saying that you wasted 7 or 8 years of your life building the wrong product, having these failures, doing this other stuff. But that presupposes that if you had encountered RPA on your first day on the job, imagine it was the first client that ever called you, you would have had the same epiphany. And I bet, I'm curious if you agree with this, my experience is that it requires all that failure and struggle to be able to appreciate these small opportunities. Because in a well-financed, eager young entrepreneur just beginning, we're like, it doesn't seem that big. But when you've really had the pain of trying and failing to get traction, these small signals of traction, of what we call the leading indicators of the future, you've been conditioned, you've been prepared to open yourself to those possibilities, and therefore you can commit to the pivot much harder than you could have if you thought of yourself as a genius who had all the answers from day one. Does that resonate with you? Is that like your experience?
it really made me think that if the opportunity would have come 2-3 years earlier, yes, we would have been stuck into maybe the password management world. I've said maybe this is more important than this one. We can, or let's do both in parallel.
The classic mistake. Oh yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. But I'm a big believer in failure as a way to learn, because I believe most people are not smart enough to learn from their successes. Maybe it's possible, but it's very hard. And maybe it's not even learning. Maybe it's not a learning, but they prepare you to recognize your opening, your chances.
Yeah. I do think that's true. I think the suffering that comes from failure cracks you open. And at some point you develop that humility and that sense of openness to new ideas. And that's when the insight like you're talking about can come to you. And I know that seems strange to talk about business in these spiritual terms. We started right at the beginning, right, with the commitment to the truth and this feeling of seeing it as a sense of creative process, a sense of discovery. But that's been my experience in my life, that this process can actually really open you up to really interesting things. And to me, that's just such an incredible story of all that struggle, like leading you to this insight that then led to just one of the all-time business expansion runs, ever. And talk about what it was like to be in the hurricane of that, the tornado of the incredible growth as you kind of got on the right track. And just, it must have been a bit of whiplash for you and your team to go from this incredible struggle where you're stuck in the mud to all of a sudden you're having this incredible growth. And people often ask me, I get the call still from time to time, hey, can you help me figure out if I have product market fit? And I always tell people, if you have time to call me to ask me this question, I already know that you don't. No, with all respect, when you have product market fit, A, you'll know, and B, you'll be too busy. You'll be too busy to call. So talk about what that's like to go through, this kind of like multi-billion-dollar level of product market fit. What was it like for your team to go through that whiplash, and for you?
It was like having to wear many, many hats. It's been one of our first investor it was like a seed accelerator called Seed Camp. Mm-hmm. And they did some kind of mentorship. So I was with the guy that was he worked for Google at that time, or he just left. So I had a lot of respect for him. Google was, for me, early Google, like, was really a model as how to build. Mm-hmm. And he told me, Daniel, everything that you describe, you have to do this and that and that. And it's a lot of customers, so you cannot cope with this. It's actually a good sign. And it's, yes, you are, to your point. I was too busy to call you, Eric, to ask you if I have product market fit. It was there. It was tremendous. Mm-hmm. And then you just start to learn that you have to hire the first hires at that point, I think, are critical. And I had the intuition to hire some kind of misfits from the corporate world. I didn't hire normal people that I would come to hire later, experienced people. So I hired some kind of misfit, smart people, but they allow me to unload some of the hats. And
how did you know? This is one thing, a question I get a lot. When you're hiring misfits, especially in the early days, I always tell people, when you're an entrepreneur, you don't always have your pick of who to hire. Not like everyone on the planet is clamoring to work for you. Of course, if someone leaves a multi-million-dollar company to come work for your tiny little company, like, first question is, what's wrong with that person? Not why would they want to do it, but why on earth would they leave their comfortable environment? But some people have a fear of hiring the quote unquote misfits, and maybe they're just bad at their job. There's some misfits who are just can't work anywhere and actually just are terrible people. How did you tell, like, who is the misfit who's like actually going to thrive in your environment, is actually going to be committed to you and your mission? What were kind of some of the signs that you look for in those early people?
Well, I don't think it's kind of a recipe. Look, sometimes I am fascinating, hearing Peter Thiel with his question, tell me something that nobody else believes in. Maybe it's a way to find misfits. But for me, I think at this point was, are they cool? Are they people that I like hanging around? Can we have a decent conversation? Can we talk about random topics? Honestly, it was the coolness factor plus the IQ. So I think they are, for an early startup, they are big predictors of, of people that fit into the culture.
Yeah, fit is such a critical element. It's funny you call it cool because, of course, for some people, coolness probably, conjures up like the hipster, who lives a high fashion life and is in line with the popular culture. Here you're talking about cool as it relates to your culture and the kind of things that you care about.
Yeah, cool in the sense of having also different interests. Not, I think the misfits are not unidimensional people, not even very good Because honestly, the best developers, the best engineers will not come to work for you. Unless you are a very hype startup. In my case, no. People would not come from even higher paid jobs for some kind of the appearance of equity or something. So you need people with varied interest. I mean, we were staying at the office it was at 10 p.m. It was full of people. We were having, a glass of wine, talking different things. I remember one of the good friend of mine. So that we started the interview like at 6 p.m. and at 10 p.m. we were still talking about cars after, we went through and having a bottle of wine. This guy still remembers. And this is, I think it's kind of unique how you find them initially. And it's very unique.
This episode is brought to you by Gusto. I'm a huge fan of Gusto. I've used the product myself across many companies, many startups, large, small business, venture-backed, you name it. I've used Gusto for payroll, for benefits, for employee onboarding, HR, even small group health insurance for nearly any budget. Best of all, Gusto pays all your federal, state, and local payroll taxes in all 50 states. It turns an incredibly time-consuming and painful process into the click of a button. That's why I like Gusto. Oh, and if you're listening to this, you can get 3 months free at gusto.com/Eric. That's gusto.com/ERIC.
I think that's part of why you were able to develop such a strong culture company, because you were hiring for that, whether by design or necessity, and we can obviously when you have such a tight cultural fit like that, obviously there's issues of diversity, there's issues of meritocracy. So that it's not like it's without its cost, but one of the advantages of it for sure is you create this high coherence, high integrity culture that you're able to scale. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how, as you started to have success, you did start to bring on venture capital, you started to raise money, you started to bring in these other stakeholders, who in a lot of companies, push to squash that stuff and try to make companies more like the norm. And sometimes even are so greedy that they cause the company to kind of kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So talk about what it was like to kind of protect and maintain that integrity, even as the amount of money started to go up and the stakes got high.
And I think to be candid, I protected up to a point, and after that point I failed. I think our culture today has much diluted into more of a regular company. Actually, in my second gig as CEO, I'm trying to bring back, the culture of the company. But I can tell about the first 4 or 5 years, and we've seen tremendous growth. Was one, I hired myself first maybe 150 people in the company, all of them. So first 150 people were all through a long interview. It's a big commitment in time. But at least 1 hour interview I spent with about with how many I spend 1 hour without hiring. So it's a huge commitment.
Sure, that's thousands of hours you're talking about right off the bat.
Yeah. And then when I started to delegate the last hiring call, I did it to people that I was trusting them completely in terms of finding cultural fit people. And we were not, and it was still a time when the hiring strategy was go for athletes, go for people that have the horsepower, not necessarily the expertise, and go for fun people that we want to hang out together. And we did. As a funny story, our choice of an office in early years always had to include a big terrace, because this is where the culture of the company was born. And people talking, and it's something, now it's really missing after all this COVID stuff, but it was something magical into seeing all of these people and mixing work and life together and staying long hours, gelling together, having fun, solving. So it was common to see a guy with a laptop and, responding to a customer while being engaged into a fun discussion or listening to music, many people. It was fun. It was powerful, very inspiring.
And that human connection obviously leads to better collaboration, but also I think a very common thing people don't realize is how damaging silos and kind of distinct subcultures can be. Again, to that incoherence point, that when people can no longer communicate to each other because they no longer see each other as human beings, they see each other as representatives of a different tribe. That is the beginning of a lot of bureaucracy and process and internal conflict, and that can rip companies apart.
Completely. And it made companies complacent. Because when you start to cut people's voices, and they were used to raise problem, being taken seriously, but you hire more and more high-level executives building these silos, and suddenly people that were pushed below stop having a voice. It's so damaging to the culture because they become complacent. They become even a bit toxic, nostalgic about something in the past, spreading.
Maybe cynical about the possibility.
Cynical,
Our previous conversation. I really appreciate you saying that, because a very common misconception is that when people talk about worker empowerment or whatever these kind of people give it these fancy terms, employees having a voice. I think a lot of people see that as kind of like a kumbaya, not very serious thing. It's like a nice to have. Oh, sure, if you think that's good, it's fine. But I think you're really helping us understand that it's a source of strength of the organization, and therefore it does translate eventually into competitive advantage. And companies that are missing that, the toxic residue that's left over when you withdraw that connection is very expensive to have to clean up. It's a huge tax on the productivity of the company.
Since the beginning, I promoted a channel on our Slack called Feedback. And it was, you could have put your comments fully anonymous. So that was way before Blind and all these sites.
Yeah.
So
such an important thing.
It's such an important thing to was also, what I discover is, what's my management style, if you want this. I want to find early signs of cancer into an organization and go cure it. I think organizational cancers follow exactly, like cancers in real life. You find them early, you can cure them. Later on, it can destroy.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you using the metaphor of cancer. First of all, because I really believe that companies, organizations are super organisms and they're alive. And therefore these issues are a form of disease. but also cancer is the fastest growing thing in the world. So I feel like companies that are pursuing growth at all costs often embrace cancer and become cancers. They embrace their internal cancers because they're growing quickly and it's exciting. And I think it's very important to have that mental model that you need an immune system to make sure the kinds of growth you're pursuing is the kind of growth that's aligned really with the mission and purpose of the organization.
Yeah, I reflected a lot on our past mistakes. And this is our chasing growth at all cost was one of our biggest mistakes because it reflected in hiring, sales comp policies, and structure of the company, even the deal structure with customers. It has profound implications.
Yeah.
And they, in a way, growing at all costs, I realized later, it's actually a bit stealing from your future.
Mm-hmm.
And because I can bring revenue from the future right now in the present, but I create a huge tension on how fast software can be adopted, and can I keep the pace if I steal from the future, and then you see you accelerate the plateauing.
You have to keep doing it.
You hire too much, and it's everything that is unnatural is gonna create issues later on.
Yeah. I remember a pension fund owner explained it to me this way. He was talking about how they have massive amounts of forestry in their investment portfolio because I think so many public companies are doing the behavior you're describing. They're actually, their numbers are basically fake because they're doing everything necessary to hit the quarter. And therefore they're underinvesting in the long term. And at first I didn't understand. I thought he was talking about forestry stocks or something. He's like, no, we buy actual productive land and we hold it. We tend to it and we reap the rewards of being good stewards of it. And he used it as a metaphor. He said, look, if we want to make the quarter, any quarter, we can always cut down the trees and sell the wood. And we can make any quarter, we can have the revenue be anything we want it to be. And we could do that for years, making it look like we had a more productive asset than we do, except one day there's no more trees. And I just that metaphor stuck with me for all these years because I see companies doing this all the time.
Yeah.
And they think, and unfortunately, we're in a culture now where that can be praised. You can be on the cover of magazines for doing that. And in fact, you can get yourself promoted into some other job, taking a massive golden parachute with you before the bill ever becomes due. And then it's somebody else's problem to clean it up.
Yeah. I can trace back many instances of this type of people that we hired and they left with the golden parachute and left us with no trees.
Yeah. Well, but okay. So before we get to that, because I want to talk about the future too, but I have to ask you about the process of going public. Of course, because we've talked about it many times, but also with all this challenge that was going on at the time, the pandemic, this massive, you're talking about the mistakes that you made, but you got something right because ultimately, UiPath was one of the most successful IPOs in terms of like the short-term impact of it, the money that was raised, all the good stuff. Like you had what I think anybody from the outside would have said is a very successful IPO. Talk about what that was like. What was the process of going public like for you? And what did you notice at the time? Like what was the before and after? What was the changes in the company that were caused as a result of making that change in corporate form?
Look, at that time, before going public and maybe first year after going public, I didn't think so seriously about it. It came a bit naturally. We started talking like around 2020, after it was clear that COVID is actually an accelerator of businesses. But why not? Let's go public. It was Snowflake that went public in, I think, the fall of 2020, and we were following closely. We had a board member that was also on the Snowflake board member. As a Snowflake, Karl Achenbach, him. And then, look, the idea was clear. We thought that we were ready. Our financial systems were, I think, in good shape. But I didn't realize that we are not mentally ready to go after this grind, quarter over quarter grind. So the roadshow itself, going IPO, I learned a lot of things. I think I think my mind it's clearer right now. I can think with better clarity.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, UiPath obviously it's not as successful from the Wall Street perspective as in 2021. But I think many of us, and first of all myself, because I know myself better, I think I'm clearly the best version of myself right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a tough process to do an IPO.
Yeah.
It's a great learning to talk with public investors and understand the framework of, what you can share, what you cannot share, how to build. You have to build relationships in a very quick way. And I don't think people that are private understand the pressure of having so many other people voting with their wallet. And they can vote, they can go long or they can short you. And I didn't really realize, and it's so true, the moral in your company is tied to the stock price. The moment you've become public, there is zero you can influence this. As long as your stock price goes up, your moral will go up.
Yeah.
I unfortunately, Eric, I don't think it's maybe, I think even in the most missionary companies in the world, if the stock goes down, the moral will tank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I actually feel a lot of guilt about this because, and not just for UiPath, but you were one of several CEOs where we had these conversations in advance of the IPO. And I honestly feel like I failed you. I hadn't yet learned how to influence those processes. And I feel like it took me a long time to realize, like, how do you talk to somebody, how you help them prepare them for these events, both structurally, but as you're saying, I really underappreciated the mental side of this. And I've been at this a long time. So I've seen many companies go through the cycle that you're talking about. And that the way that the volatility impacts the day-to-day experience of employees is such a ruthless and really destructive aspect of our current market system. And I think it's that. I think most people have this belief that there's nothing that can be done about it. But of course, there are things that can be done, and I feel bad that we weren't able to spare you. It sounds to me like you've come on the other side of it really, really strong. And I'm sure there are good things about it, but part of me really wishes we could have found a way to spare you that experience, because it is really.
There is a new breed of entrepreneurs that are preparing to go public. Some of them at astonishingly high valuation. So it's interesting to see how things are going. But markets are very punishing, really. And I don't think still there is an equilibrium after COVID, even if you see the last 2 days in the market. And it's so insane.
We're recording this right after the DeepSeek release, and therefore the attendant. This will come out in a little while, so people can know when we're having this conversation. Yeah, it's wild. I think. Well, I appreciate you talking about it candidly, because I do think we have this next generation of entrepreneurs, and they deserve protection from these forces. And people hear me say that, and they think, "Oh, you're for unaccountability, or you're saying that founders should be emperors for life." That's not what we're talking about. This is actually in investors' best interest. Most investors, even short-term investors, do not appreciate how damaging the volatility is for the actual decision-making of the company. And I remember, I'll never forget this. I was sitting with a quantitative trader once, and he was explaining to me his process of engineering synthetic shorts against companies to drive volatility. He makes money the more volatility there are. So he developed this whole range of techniques to create synthetic volatility so that he could do his synthetic shorts. And he was really proud of himself. And I asked him to do this visualization exercise with me. See if this will give you some pain, but I hope you can imagine it. I asked him, imagine for me a day in the future where you've engineered a short against a company and it worked. The stock price is way down today. And you've just made, your trade is very much in the black. So you just made a lot of money. He's got this big grin on his face, like, oh, what a great day. I was like, do you realize that the 10,000 people that work at that company are going to spend today running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out what to do about this scenario? And he looked at me like, why? was like, well, they think the stock went down because the market has passed judgment on their company. He's like, but they didn't. I just engineered this. And you just told me it's a synthetic short. I was like, I know, but do you understand? And I was like, do you understand you play a profound role in the governance of this corporation? And he looked at me like two heads. I'll never forget. He was like, when I short cattle futures, the cows don't care. Why do these people care? He actually had never thought about it. And he was completely blind to the human costs of this behavior. And he didn't realize the extent to which he's actually damaging the asset that he's a big investor in. Now, he doesn't care because he's short the position and the damage is irrelevant to him. But like, why should people like that be the drivers of corporate governance? Why should they be the ones who we're trying to placate and please? It makes no sense at all.
Yeah. And speaking from the perspective of the people impacted, it's terrible, honestly, because it's like someone is slapping you on the face on the street, or someone is cursing you. So it's impossible not to feel bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it's so unnecessary.
You feel that you do all the right things, and then you continuously are slapped into the face. It's tough, but again, it's a rite of passage.
Yeah.
After a while, I am less sensitive now.
Yeah. You've learned to manage it. Well, it's like a hazing ritual that, yes, you can survive it, but why are we putting our best companies through this process? It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
You and I will do what we can for the next. If there's any next generation founders who are listening to this, we have your back. We're going to try and make some change here.
Yeah. I'm very happy to talk to many people about this experience and how, because I think there is, if you know better what to expect, maybe there are ways to navigate, the waters of the public markets.
Yeah. Well, and there are structural things you can do. I mean, even just the basic thing of knowing who your investors actually are, the anonymity of it is really corrosive. So anyway, we can, so there's a lot that can be done. People we'll discuss it another time, but there's a lot to do. But for this conversation, I don't want to veer off into hypotheticals, because I also think a really important part of your story has been, you stepped back as CEO, and you referred to this as your second stint as a CEO. You did that as a public company. Just what was that like? And why have you decided to come back and resume the CEO reins?
Look, it's been in the moment last year, when we were seeing some really macro pressures on our numbers. And my co-CEO, Rob, has decided to leave for personal reasons. So at that point, I was not thinking I will step back soon or ever on this job. So I had maybe a few months of stepping aside a bit. So I was doing mostly product and engineering. So it was a more relaxed job.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I already knew at that time that I kind of missed the thrill of running the boat as a CEO. That's saying of Steve Jobs saying that the CEO has the magic wand to make things happen. It's true. Because I've seen, even if I am the majority shareholder and I have a controlling stake in the company, not being the CEO was make me less influential in the company.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't believe it's gonna happen, but it did, in all fairness. And then I always had the debate with myself. Man, what's my meaning in life? Because in my 20s and in my 30s, and roughly all my life, I was living in my head. I was building this company. I was reading. I never had, honestly, fun in the sense that many people have. So going wild, going maybe 1 year sabbatical, going into, climbing Himalaya or all of this stuff. So I thought that, look, maybe I need to experience this, but staying aside gave me clarity that the sense of my life is to have my cognitive processes going. If they don't go, I'm unhappy. I'm really happy if I can engage in meaningful conversations, in meaningful brainstorming, driving stuff. It's intense, it's tough, and we are at the big change in technology. Can be a headwind for us, can be a tailwind. How we are veering completely the company, it's not easy, but I prefer it. And the market is slapping us, for like 3 quarters. But I prefer it. I prefer it to staying aside, going on a boat and watching UiPath from the distance, even with the stock price 3 times higher. I prefer it right now being, I'm in the game. We are in the game. You want to be in the game. I don't believe in retirement, really. Mm-hmm. I read a very interesting book before going into the CEO role. It's called Dopamine Nation. I think it's
sure.
And I realized that we are kind of wired in a way that artificial pleasure, it's always come at the cost of pain. So I think you get to know yourself. For me, running this company is not artificial pleasure. For me, it's something profound. It's like, this is how my brain is wired. So if I don't do this, I will suffer. It's counterintuitive in many ways, I think. But this is why probably many people continue to. I am not a power hungry guy. I don't care about it, honestly. I don't care about titles. I don't really care about going on the big show, drawing a lot of attention to me. But being in the middle of thoughts of understanding the world, understanding technology, influencing it, this is, my brain is wired to do this.
So I want to pick up on 2 related things that you said earlier in the interview that I really want to come back to. And I actually think they might be 2 sides of the same coin. And I'm curious if you see it this way. On the one hand, you talked about the mistakes that you made in hiring and culture. And you said part of your mandate as part of your second stint of the CEO is to go back and restore some of that cultural integrity that was lost, to rebuild the mission orientation of the company. And you also talked about basically conducting a business pivot to go all into agentic AI in a way that reminded me a lot of your original burn the boats pivot into RPA in the first place. And I'm curious that, to me, like, those seem like 2 aspects of a really massive pivot that frankly is rare for a multi-billion-dollar public company to be willing to undertake. And I love the audacity of it. And I wonder if you could just talk about what is your view of this pivot? How is it playing out? What do you think is going to happen? And what's the future here?
Yeah, I think to the early point in our conversation, pain and exhaustion at some point gives you clarity. To me, one point of clarity was that I want to work with people that I enjoy working with. Even if I can hire higher caliber people, but I cannot work with, it doesn't matter. But I have to not be myself. I have to pretend I'm someone else, and I cannot speak my voice. I cannot curse, or this is me in the end. I am not gonna. So I decided to build a team with people that enjoy working with each other, and I enjoy working with them. I don't want to ever be in a position to call people and be on my toes and maybe, what do you think about this? But maybe no, it's not worth it, and it's not working. Yeah. And so that was so in this way, I think we are changing the company. And I said to many people, guys, we are not hiring from outside. We are gonna promote from inside. A lot of people. I'm not gonna take another big risk with people that we don't know, huge expertise. They bring, another tons of people and creating. No, let's take our company back. Let's take our culture. Let's put it in front. And second, in terms of technology, I seriously, look, you are an engineer, so you will understand better what I'm saying. And I was always very adamant we are going to have only one workflow technology in the company. Because I thought it's very difficult to have two. And I think that was the limiting. That it worked well to become the czar of RPA in a way. But after in a post-RPA world, and we are a bit in a post-RPA world, it doesn't work so well.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually our move completed the pivot into agentic was when we have embraced a new workflow technology. So we are building, in addition to our RPA workflows, we are building a new, I think, modern workflow technology. That is, RPA in essence, it's a task automation technology. So now we are building a true end-to-end process automation technology. And we are building on the top of a great piece of software called Temporal. It's it's not a workflow engine in itself, but it's coming from an idea of promoting durable execution for software. It's actually a great idea. The people behind it are very smart people, but using Temporal and building our workflow engine on the top of it allows us to abstract away all the activities required to automate steps in a workflow. So with this combination, I can look, for instance, we are gonna have even frameworks like LangChain. We can run natively as part of our end-to-end workflows. We couldn't have done this with our RPA workflows. We can embrace a lot more open source technologies into all of this overarching framework. So this is how we started the pivoting. And then, it's come a bit gradually. It's not easy to let go of the past. But at some point, I think all of us were, wow, this is actually, we have to go all in into this. So over the last 2-3 months, really, we went through many of the initiatives that we were doing in engineering and said, put a lot on ice and move a lot of people into the agentic world. And I think we got a lot more clarity about our own, how do we want to build dedicated models versus, using frontier models, and we got a lot more clarity. So right now to me, it's kind of clear that agentic AI can exist in the context of an overarching workflow that is a governor.
I think that puts you in a very, very unique position to be able to make agents work in a way that other people, like the people who've tried so far to do it ungoverned, have basically failed. And I also think you'd be very well positioned to take advantage of the low-cost fine-tuning of open source models, Qdora, FSDP, stuff like that.
Yeah, and speaking about DeepSeek, I think for a company like us, being in the position to actually host and fine-tune our own frontier model completely on our cloud, it's a game changer.
Oh, yeah, it's very exciting. And just think how the model will be 2 years from now. I mean, it's just the rate of improvement is just incredible.
Yeah, because right now I am I'm starting to be convinced that open source actually will, it has a much brighter future. It's amazing not to have only Llama, but to have, to have a contender as good as DeepSeek. And I think that probably we are looking less in building dedicated models right now, rather than having a frontier model that we can customize and fine-tune to different use cases.
That makes sense. So you, I feel like, are better positioned than almost anybody to talk about I would say the most common fear in the public discourse, which is the fact that AI-powered automation is going to displace jobs and cause social upheaval. Or for other people, or saying the same thing, that that this technology is going to make it so that all the boring jobs go away and free up humanity to pursue more creative jobs and more meaningful types of work. So you're right at the heart of it. I mean, RPA is the original thing to be afraid of with workforce automation. You actually have all this experience of what happens as workflows become automated, as human ability is augmented with machine power. What do you see as the future of work, future of the workplace? Which fears do you buy into, and which ones do you think are overblown? And more importantly, what do you feel like are the opportunities of this brave new world we're entering into?
Yeah, look, Eric, I think there is no doubt in anyone's mind that today's jobs will disappear into some more close or distant future. So it's very unlikely that, being like a clerk in a bank with, you can have a good job today will look the same in, 10, 5, 10, 2. I cannot make a prediction for the future. But I think the most important thing is the rate of change. Now, change will occur. But how jobs will be displaced, how people's life will be impacted is strictly a factor of the rate of change. Mm-hmm. RPA maybe, so if I look at the experience of RPA, which is quite of a powerful technology in changing, many clerical jobs, adoption of RPA, it's tied not necessarily to technology in itself, but to companies' programs and inertia and change management. I think it's kind of I believe that in this moment, agentic AI plus automation, it's a very powerful combo. So if I will have the mandate, go into any big corporation, and I have the mandate, go change it from top down, and hire the best people in the world, go change it, I think it will be unrecognizable in a couple of years. But it's not clear that if the technology is ready, this is gonna happen. It's
the technology is not the limiting factor.
Yes, it's the human factor, the capability of humans. So I think it's gonna in my opinion, changing of jobs nature, today's jobs nature, will take more time than the technology to mature, to be capable of changing them.
Yeah.
So I think we will have as humanity enough time to adapt. And in the end, I think people forget something. I believe somehow, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I believe the power is in our hands. I think we've built technology to help us, not we've built technology for the sake of becoming sentient and replace us. I would be relatively surprised if we get it out of our control completely and is becoming sentient and is gonna go against humanity. To me, this is just a bit of a fear machine going on. I don't see it really as a real possibility, even in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate your optimism. I think this is one of those things that nothing is guaranteed. If we're going to have that optimistic future, we have to make it so. And it requires the pioneers who are in the control room, as you say, at the helm, to have that humanistic perspective. And I appreciate it. It gives me a lot of comfort to know that you're sitting in that seat and you're the one who's making those decisions. I believe you have a chance to make that optimistic future come true.
Well, I hope so. Look, we all might be.
Or another way of saying it is you have the moral obligation, and all of us are counting on you. No pressure.
But we do all have the moral. I think most people have integrity, and I don't think people will intend to harm humanity. Honestly, we might be stupid enough to harm ourselves, but I think we are pretty resilient. And even the fact that nuclear power so far created a world of relatively peace.
Yeah.
It's a proof that, we can confine it.
Okay. Do you have time for a lightning round?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
One of my favorite things doing the research for episodes like this is just I get to see all the cool things you've said and written about in the past. And you have some turns of phrase that I think were awesome. And I just wanted to ask you about a couple of them. So, just give me your quick reactions to each of these if you like. And obviously we can cut anything. Yeah. Okay. You said that you personally don't believe in happiness and you think the pursuit of happiness in itself is a mistake. Explain.
Yeah, it's my, I think the pursuit of happiness has its own cost. And the cost of pursuing happiness is its meaning. Mm-hmm. I think happiness in a way is enough in itself. While maybe not unhappiness, but the pursuit of meaning, I'm not sure it's compatible with the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And
it's confusing the input with the output, I think, is how I would say.
Yeah. Sometimes I think happiness is a byproduct of pursuing meaning. Mm-hmm. But when I said it's not my thing, I'm not pursuing. I'm not pursuing actively happiness. I enjoy having good moments, mm-hmm. but sometimes maybe I'm even afraid when I feel too happy. I kind of feel that the downside will come. I quit drinking coffee like 2 years ago, and I feel better. I don't mind the peaks because I don't like the downs.
Totally. Equanimity for the win. Okay, this one was near and dear to my heart. You said the fastest company will always win. Obviously, I've been evangelizing that idea for a long time, but talk about concretely, why is speed so important to you as a corporate attribute?
Because I think speed is it's a very equivalent of learnings. You learn fast. You will learn faster. Because if you don't do anything, right? You don't make decisions. You are not facing the consequences of your decisions. So you learn less. To me, it's almost like a framework. It's mathematical. Mm-hmm. So you have to break glass. You have to make faster decisions and iterate over them. Get rid of your decisions. To me, I always tell people, guys, if you look back and you have not changed your mind even in a few months, that's a sign you don't go fast enough.
Can't fail, you can't learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially as companies get larger, the number one way to avoid making a mistake or having a risk or a compliance issue is to never do anything at all. But that has its own risk.
Yeah, and that drives me crazy when I've seen that in UiPath we have become so risk adverse. It drives me crazy, really.
Oh, you said you never believe in work-life balance. That's the right idea, but it's the wrong way to describe what you're seeking. Explain what you mean by that.
So I don't want to be confused with an oppressor that want, people to work all the time.
Yeah.
That's not what I don't believe in fixed work-life cycles. Like I'm going to work 8 hours and then I'm going home and I'm staying with my kids another 5. I don't think this is how it works. I feel that in our society, I think we are always both at work and in our personal, and life and work are intermingled. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I know very few people, or I don't know anyone actually that is going home and the work completely disappear from their mind. I don't believe this. I think actually most of the people will go to meditate, do some extreme sports to avoid thinking. But it's not. It's gonna be there. We just have to admit it. And look, I really think that most of the people are, even when they are with their kids and family, it's impossible. If you have a very interesting problem, it stays in the back of your mind. And also, if you are I think many times when I'm at work, I can think of my family, or, it's normal to have it. It's.
Yeah. And that if you're in that state of flow at work, it has these beneficial effects for you. It's called spillover effects in the academic literature. It spills over into the other aspects of your life. Whereas if you're in the opposite of flow, if you're in meetings all the time, if you're being disparaged, if you don't feel safe, it has these negative spillovers.
Yeah.
So I think, people who are seeking work-life balance, I think, or trying to protect themselves from work, often it's just a product of being in a toxic work environment. And I'm always like, well, go find an organization that cares as much about your state of flow as it does about its quarter, and you won't have those issues anymore.
No,
and
I really like it. No, seriously.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you agree. I kind of have lately been thinking about what is the organizational equivalent of the state of flow.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know what it looks like for an individual, but can an organization exist in that state? And that's definitely been on my mind as you've been talking about all the different things that you've been trying to practice. I might say that your goal, and I want to see if you agree with this, is to build a company where the organization is such in a state of flow that it provides that opportunity for as many of its employees as possible. Is that true?
Let me know when you find the recipe. This is why we put being immersed as our.
I'm working on it.
Core pillar.
Okay, last one. I got to ask you. You very famously said that to pursue UiPath's rapid expansion, you pursued the Genghis Khan growth strategy.
Yeah.
And I feel like, for better or for worse, that's a lot is encapsulated in that phrase. Explain the Genghis Khan growth strategy and explain how you feel about it now.
I think the idea was to move very fast and to attack different points in the same time. And so we spread into both US and Japan at the same time. And honestly,
why not?
Why not? And we are more successful in Japan. So we move much faster than our competitors, being in Japan. And we build a lot of our orchestration software using with the help of this SMBC, a mega Japanese bank. And then when we went back to US, I think we were in better shape than our competitors. It's also being fast. The Genghis Khan was at that point, had the fastest army in the world, and they captured cities over cities without, like the Chinese army being capable of defending their cities. It was a very interesting story. And I'm not saying that we copied it, but I like to study history. So I think in retrospect, I thought this is actually the analogy. A very small company, but with the fast horse riders, like we had our misfits that went across the world and they found an opportunity and they conquered, the cities. Fast. And then it's creating, an amplifying effect. You learn more, you build better army, you attract more people, so then you become unbeatable. I think it was a great strategy.
Minus the pillaging part, probably.
Yes. We didn't. We didn't. No, on the contrary, we brought a technology that, my partner in Japan, I was very lucky to find a great friend there, that we build a business together. Always told me that he believed that RPA is going to save Japan in a way. So we conquered and saved Japan in the same time.
Beautiful. I'm glad we can end on that note, because I think, someone who's built this company that has impacted so many people and has such transformative potential ahead of it. Like I said, I have a sense of relief and optimism that you're back at the helm. And so,
and it's yet to come. Now it's coming, really, the best part.
Yeah.
The AI, the agentic AI and automation they are meant to be together. We always waited for this moment to give the brain to all our arms and legs. And now it's coming, it's powerful.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on the success. Congratulations on this. Good luck in this second stint at the helm. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with so many of this next generation of entrepreneurs who like I said, we're going to do better for them than we did for you. But thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it was so fun talking to you. Really. It's good discussions. Can't wait to have next one in person.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.